Yep.
So anyway, Gary's on the show not to talk about Colorado or Florida, but actually to talk about how you can increase your chances of getting considered when you apply online for a top CIO or CISO job. That's Chief Information Officer, Chief Information Security Officer. It's also going to talk about all the mistakes he sees people make during interviews. Now, he was telling me when I invited him on the show that you pretty much filled all your jobs. You don't have a lot of jobs begging right now, but you can tell people at least when those jobs do become available, what's the best way to get them and how not to blow it, right?
Yeah. Well, good morning or good afternoon. I'm sorry, it's 12:30 here, so it just turned afternoon. It's interesting. We had a really strong start to 2021. A number of opportunities. And I was talking to somebody today, and it looks like the market has slowed down considerably. And I think it's due to the impact of the Delta variant of COVID. It's created an uncertainty around when people will start going back to the office. We've all been optimistic. We get vaccinated, everything will be fine. And then here comes this variant that's causing problems. So we've seen a slowdown. We still have some, let me describe it real quickly. We still got some pretty good jobs out there. We're looking for a vice president of engineering who understands warehouse management systems. And that can be working from anywhere. That's for a relatively small but very successful software as a service company that specializes in that space.
What state is, I know you don't want to give up the name, but what state is that company in?
Well, they were in New York City, then they moved to Florida. But then with the pandemic, they've decided everybody's going to work remotely. So they're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
In California, they got people in North Carolina, New York City, Atlanta, Sarasota, Florida, et cetera. So this person can work from anywhere. They don't have to be in that city.
Is there a minimum number of years of experience that you're looking for?
Well, they've got to have led a team of 15 to 20 people in software development and have at least 5 years of experience in warehouse management systems.
Okay.
They don't have that. Our client won't look. One of the founders of this company is looking to retire, and he's looking for his replacement.
Oh,
so it's a very good opportunity. Salary is good, but the upside with stock is could be quite significant.
Interesting.
So let's talk a little bit about, what you said you wanted to talk about here today, which was how to maximize your chances when you're in a competitive position for one of these jobs. Do you have, say, a top 5 or top 10 tips for people when they're being considered for these positions?
Well, let me take my number one tip. Okay. Now this is, and we get lots of complaints from people. They say, I apply for a job online and nobody gets back to me, right? Or I apply for a job and nobody gets back to me. The problem is today with so many online capabilities for people finding jobs that they end up with whoever's putting the job out there, they get hundreds, if not thousands of resumes for the job. So for the most part, they can just scan through them and right click or left click based on reading the first page of the resume. So my number one tip for people, if you're frustrated about not hearing back from people, don't apply for jobs that you're not qualified for. Only apply for, I mean, that seems really obvious, doesn't it? Right? And
yeah, you would think.
You get a lot of people saying, but I know I can do the job. Okay, great. But they don't know you can do the job, and they're going to find people who've already done the job. So if you have a choice between somebody that maybe has never done the job and somebody who's absolutely done the job, which one are you going to look at? So it's pretty obvious. So only apply for jobs that you're fit for. That's the number one tip. Number two tip is on your resume. At the very top of the resume, right under your short professional summary, you should put down qualifications for the position of whatever job you're applying for. So whoever's reading that resume can immediately sense why you're a fit for that. And then make sure your resume has details that support that information afterwards. I can't emphasize that. We call that's an Executive Search Partners innovation. We call that the in-resume cover letter. Don't send a cover letter. A lot of people say, I send a cover letter. And nobody reads cover letters. So put it in your resume. Put that section 4 or 5 dot points, no more than 2 sentences each, right near the top of the resume.
And that's in large part because you were telling me that, for a given job, you may have 1,000 resumes you're looking at. So obviously you're moving through them very quickly, right?
Yeah. We had one job where we had 1,600 people apply.
Oh, my God.
That was a little unusual. It was a chief information security position, security officer position, and we were looking in both Detroit and New York City. And so we had a lot of people applying for both. And they're not 800, they're 1,600 qualified CISOs out there applying for the job. So we probably cut it down to maybe 50 out of the 60.
I was going to ask you how many of those 1,600 didn't follow your number one rule.
1,550 of them.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's our number one tip, is only apply for jobs that you're qualified for. And if you're qualified, put that at the top of your resume and tell the person who's reading the resume why you're a fit for it. And one of the hints that you can get about what you put there, you get them from 2 places. One, look at the job posting. What are they saying they're looking for? And 2, if you're really qualified for the job, you ought to know what they're looking for, and you ought to know the key attributes that you have that you can present to them for that kind of position. So use that at the top of the resume.
What else?
Second thing is, all right, so let's say you get a chance to interview for a position, right? The number one complaint I hear from people is that they've got several complaints, but why did you reject that person? Well, they talk too much, right? Now, everybody talks. I mean, I'm talking a lot right now. We're talking here, but everybody talks. Nobody wants the person who's interviewing you not to fully understand who you are, right? So people tend to say what they want to say, then they say it again, and then they say it again, just like I'm doing. Would you like to know how to get around that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay. So we suggest.
I was afraid to say anything, but yeah.
Yeah, I had us terrified there, but go ahead. No,
Okay. I've got 2 golden rules that I like to tell people about interviewing. The first one is, the more the other person talks, the better you look. And that's a little bit humorous. And what that really means is keep your answers short. So if somebody asks you a question, right, give them an answer back that's short and to the point. That also means that you probably need to prepare ahead of time for the interviews. And what I recommend that people do is they go back over the last 10 years of their career and they write down 10 accomplishments per year in a very specific format. And the format I recommend is one that a lot of people will recognize, that because a lot of companies use this internally. There's a way you can describe your accomplishments in a par or a star or a car or a SAR. They all mean the same thing. Describe the business problem you were working on, the actions you took, and the measurable results you achieved. All right. The other thing I tell people about an interview is, remember that the interview is not about you. And most people say, well, of course it's about me. Well, of course it's about you, but usually the interviewer, anytime, I'm sure anybody who's done any interviewing, Mike and Matt and anybody else, when you interview somebody, you know the questions you want to get through, all right, to find out something about that individual. So you can figure out whether you want to get into more detail with them. And usually during the first 20 minutes of an interview, the interviewer is the one that ought to be leading the questions. And you, as the interviewee, need to keep your answers short and focused and on target. And a lot of people will say, if, okay, so I answered the question, how do I know that they heard me? Well, we'll get to that at the end of this, my 3rd or 4th tip that we're going to talk about here. How do we know that they actually heard you? But most of the time, if you answer with a good, solid answer to the question that's short and focused, if the interviewer wants to know more, they'll ask you.
Yeah, when I was a beat reporter, essentially, and did investigative work too, I would already know the answer to the question. I just wanted to hear what you were going to say. I don't have the luxury of putting that much time into stories anymore, where I can spend a week just prepping. But yeah, I get what you're saying. So,
mistake number one that people do is they don't, they talk too much. All right. Mistake number two is that they don't know the company. You know, why, you know, one of the questions that almost everybody asks is, well, why are you interested in this company? All right. And you know, if you can't give a detailed answer, if you haven't studied the company, then people know that maybe you're not a good candidate for the company. Maybe you're really not interested, or maybe you're just sort of passing the time of day with them right there. So, you know the company.
Yeah, that always struck me as incredible that you would bother to take all the time to apply for a job and sit in an interview and not do at least several hours of research on the company. I mean, why even bother at that point? You know, I mean, you're going to be spending a significant chunk of your life there. Don't you want to know pretty much everything as much as you can find out about it? Then that's the way I always approached it.
Yeah,
So.
I always think when I find candidates, the first question I ask, I tell them about the company, and I say, what questions do you have for me about this job? Because before we get into my questions about you, I want to make sure that this is something that you might be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let me go on to the next one. The next mistake I think that people find in interviews goes back to having pars and being able to answer questions. And that basically is that when somebody asks you a question, you've got to be able to provide specific answers. Excuse me. And I get interviewers complaining to me, well, we couldn't pin him down. We couldn't get a straight answer. All right. Well, most of the time, the person's qualified for the position. They just don't have good enough examples. So going back to my suggestion about creating 50 to 100 pars that you write down ahead of time and then you can pull up from your mind, I think that's one of the top things that you ought to be doing. But before you interview is get prepared, know yourself, be able to provide specific examples, do them in a way that conveys the problem you were working on, the actions that you took, and the results you achieved. And try and do each of those in 2 sentences. Not each of the par, the P or the A or the R of the par, but do the entire par in two sentences.
okay. What else?
Boy, you're wanting me to, okay, go through this whole thing. One of the things I mentioned, I can go through my whole 12 steps for a highly successful job search, but I'm giving the key attributes about how to be successful in both looking for a job and in interviewing for a job. One of the things that people, at the end of an interview, you want to know how you did in that interview.
Right.
And you usually can't say to the guy that's interviewing you, how did I do? You know, what do you think of me? I mean, but you can ask a subtle question. You can ask 2 questions I recommend. The first question is, what are the top 4 or 5 things you expect the person in this position to get done in the next year?
That's a great question.
And what happens is if the person comes back and says, well, I think you should be able, we expect you to get this done and this done and this done. That allows you as the interviewer to remind the person that's interviewing you that you've already done all those things, that you can do them again. Or you can say, we talked about number 1 and number 3 and number 5, but we didn't talk about number 2. Let me give you an example of what I've done that is like what you're looking for me to get done in the next year, right? In this job, if you hire me. And you can give them a par. And they said, and then number 5, that's another one. So that reinforces that you are qualified for the position. Now that doesn't get to the real question, how did I do in the interview? So the final question you ask is, how do you feel my qualifications fit the requirements of the position? And when you say my qualifications, you're not asking to say, what do you think about me? You're saying, what do you think about my background and experience? Do you think I have the background and experience to fit the position? And you're not asking the person to judge you at that point. How does my background and experience fit what the company is looking for in the position? So it makes it almost a third party kind of kind of event. So that's a really great question to ask at the end of the interview. And then if somebody says, well, I think your background, you're good here, here, and here, but you might be missing something here, that gives you a chance to answer that objection to them hiring you.
And typically on these interviews, it's like they've already scaled it down to what, 3 to 5 people that they really like, and then that's who they're interviewing, or how does that play out?
Usually what happens is the company will start with 3, 4, 5 different people and interview them. Oftentimes, and this is an interesting truth of the recruiting world, is oftentimes they won't take any of those candidates. All right? Because what they've discovered during the interview process is that even though they think this is what they want, as they go through the interview process, they say, well, I really am looking for somebody who has these attributes, plus I want them to also have these other attributes. So frequently in a search, we'll present up to about 15 people for a position. All right. So, the first 3 to 5 may not be an exact fit. If they're not, we then go out and modify the search and interview candidates for other positions. We try and shortchange that to make it efficient for our clients and for us by creating a profile of the ideal candidate ahead of time and asking them to review it. But even when you go through that kind of detailed analysis of the position, we still get, it's knowing by doing, it's prototyping in a lot of ways. I prototype and I find what I'm missing.
So how long, what's the typical duration of a search process for one of these high profile jobs, like a CISO for a good sized corporation?
Could be 6 months, could be 8 or 9 months, something like that. Part of the delay is you want to find good qualified candidates. So that takes 2, 3, 4 weeks to really get a good slate of candidates together. And then you go through the interview process and, you start with maybe the hiring manager, and then the hiring manager wants you to interview with some of his peers or maybe some of the people on the executive leadership team. And they're not always available. So that might take another month, right? And then there's the process of, well, okay, I think this is one of the final 2 or 3 candidates that we want to interview. Now we got to take them through another series of interviews, which may take another month. So, we're talking 4 months right there just to get started. And that's just assuming that somewhere in that first group, you've had a good candidate.
Interesting. And if you haven't, you just rinse and restart again or something, right?
Sometimes, yeah, we've got a search we're doing right now that I was going to mention. We're looking for a manager of software engineering for a company up in the Sterling Heights area. And we went through 10 candidates, and then they decided to reconfigure the position entirely. And so we started all over again. We've been working on that one for 6 months, I think now. Was
that based on a management review or based on the level of candidates they got?
It's based upon their rethinking what they were looking for as we went through the search. Right, and that it's not unusual for companies to do that. These are critical positions, and you don't always get. I did a search for a. I won't mention the company's name, but a large clothing manufacturer in the Southeast Michigan area for their CIO. And you probably didn't know there was a large clothing manufacturer in the Southeast Michigan area.
I did not, no.
All right, but a very large one, well known. All right, and they were looking for a CIO, and we went through the exact spec definition. I presented 6 candidates, and they started interviewing these people with the rest of the executive team, and they got a lot of objections. So they reconfigured the search. I presented 6 more candidates. They incorporated more of the executive team. They reconfigured the search again. I went through 25 candidates.
Wow.
For them before we finally got it right. And it was just that we couldn't get the executive leadership team on the same page. And I think that may be happening in the search here. I think it's good requirements. It's good that the company's going through this. It's good that they're getting alignment around this. But the prototyping phase, that's what I'm calling it, probably takes longer than it ought to. But I respect what the companies go through. They don't want to get that wrong.
Now, is there a difference between, let's say, a company that's started by a bunch of founders and they're looking for another real close partner versus a big corporation where it's publicly traded or whatever, or maybe not? But I mean, is there a difference there in working with those two types of companies, or maybe more than two types?
Yeah, family-owned or entrepreneurial-owned companies tend to be, not sure what the right word is, a little harder to satisfy because they've been successful because of the way they've run their company up to that point. Whereas very large corporations have probably gone through that phase, and they're pretty well defined the roles of different people in the companies. So if you're doing a CIO, you still want to get for a very large company. They know what they're looking for. They had one before. They're pretty much in alignment most of the time on this. If you're an entrepreneurial company, maybe it's a new position for you. Maybe you're looking for somebody to take on an expanded role. You've never had that one before, and you're still trying to figure it out.
Makes sense.
Okay. So what is the job market like right now for these kinds of positions? Are there, tons available, some available, scarce? We keep hearing about a labor shortage. Is there a labor shortage at this level, or is that more at the line sort of employee level?
I've never seen a shortage of people who are interested in senior level IT positions in the 18 years we've been in business. We always seem to find enough candidates for those jobs. What we see is much more up and down in terms of jobs that are available for people. And usually it's when things start to slow down, companies slow down on the hiring process, as we're all aware of. And I'm sensing without fact, other than my own anecdotal experience and the input from a couple other people, that companies have slowed down their hiring process this fall. Usually it picks back up at the beginning of September. We've not seen that pick up.
And certainly with the pandemic, you mentioned in the beginning that a lot of these jobs now doesn't matter where you are, if you can do the job virtually. Is that really the big trend now I can't say post-pandemic, but so far in the pandemic?
I would say that 80 to 90% of the people who are used to working from home, and this is anecdotal again, I don't have a lot of facts, I'm just going off of our experience, like the working from home. 10 to 20% say, no, I want to get back to the office. Companies are not quite there yet. They've been very successful working from home, but they're not sure that this can continue forever. And so I'm seeing many, if not all, the searches we're doing are looking for people who are willing to come into the office at least 3 or 4 days a month, up to 2 to 3 times a week.
So that would preclude anybody that had living in Colorado and is working for a Detroit company then, right? That wouldn't be practical, right?
We're seeing some of that, but I still think people are going through the process of figuring this one out. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't have somebody living in Colorado doing work for a company in Detroit or New York City, whatever. We've proven that, but I think companies are still wondering how sustainable that is over the long run. Do people need to see each other around the water cooler, on a regular basis to really socialize and get to know each other and trust each other and come up with ideas that maybe they can't come up with on a Slack meeting?
Yeah. Well, I know I've read a lot of stories about the auto companies being much more amenable to that idea, because then that means they can essentially recruit worldwide, and these folks, wherever they might be, these really talented folks, don't have to come to the United States and deal with all that stuff, right? But are you seeing any of that? I mean, I'm sure you work with auto clients, right?
Well, I think that's an interesting, one of the shortage of workers we've had in the U.S. has been the limitation of H-1B visas.
Right.
Right. And then under the Trump administration, they were making that even a bigger cutback with the theory that maybe we can encourage more development of homegrown talent. But I think the reality is that you can hire people from anywhere around the world for these jobs. And as long as they can communicate well, meaning English language, they can do the work from anywhere. I'm working with one company in California right now where they have people in Denver, they have people in Mountain View, and they have people in Munich.
And the time difference doesn't really matter a lot, or?
Yeah, the time difference between Munich and Mountain View does, what is it, 9 hour, 10-hour time difference. That does get in the way, but they seem to have worked it out.
Somebody has to be staying late or sleeping early or whatever, right? But I mean, we got to get together. I think, though, part of, one of the things I don't miss a whole lot about the newspaper life, but one of the things I do miss is what you just said, is the camaraderie, get together for lunch, exchanging ideas. Because I do
Watching the fist fights in the newsroom. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I'm doing 8 or 10 virtual. Well, I do 3 shows, and then I must have 4 or 5, maybe 6 meetings a week that are virtual. And then I can't remember the last time I've actually been face to face with some of these people. It's been a long time. So,
well, I think we're all still trying to figure out the face to face, but we all thought when we got vaccinated, we were back to normal, and then the Delta variant hit, and now it looks like you need a 3rd shot.
yeah, or something.
And even that, you wonder, because anyway, you're protecting yourself.
I got to tell you, Gary, I know in higher education, our students have voted with their feet. We offered the option of in-person or online or hybrid, and the vast majority of them want to go back to the classroom. They want that camaraderie and that in-person exchange and that sort of impromptu, seeing each other's faces and everybody's body language and that kind of thing. They really want that.
All right. Well, coming down towards the end now, we got everybody going, I got to reach out to Gary Erickson. What an expert. How do they do that?
Well, you can contact me you go to the best place to get contact information for us is go to our website, execsearchpartners.com, and you can find us there. You can call me. I'll give you my phone number is 248-470-9976. And my email address is on the website. So either way, happy to. The thing I would recommend that people do, though, if they like the ideas that I presented here about how not to make mistakes in interviewing and how to apply online, go to our website. We've got a really good document. I mean, a really good document called 12 Steps for a Highly Successful Job Search. And we also have a sample resume. Download those and read those. Those are really good documents.